The POCO X3 GT is out now, and if you're wondering about the camera performance, this is the video for you. You're watching The Lazy Reviewers, and this is the camera review of the POCO X3 GT. Firstly, let's talk about the camera specs. On the back we have a 64 megapixel main camera, and underneath that we have an 8 megapixel ultra wide and a 2 megapixel macro camera. Moving on to the front, we have a 16 megapixel camera in this small punch hole in the middle. Now let's take a look at the camera app. In the top bar, we have the options for flash, HDR, AI, filters, Google Lens, and settings. In the bottom bar, we have Pro mode, video mode, photo mode, portrait mode, and a more options tab where we have this beautiful menu containing night mode, 64 megapixel mode, short video, panorama, document, vlog, slow motion, time lapse, long exposure, edit, and dual video. In the photo tab, we can see we have options for 0.6 times, 1 times, and 2 times zoom. And the video, we can shoot up to 4K at 30 FPS. There are a couple of things you'll notice while recording video with this phone. Firstly, let's talk about HDR. When you enable the HDR option, the phone automatically takes it to 4K 30 FPS. You can take it down to 720, 30, 1080, 30, but you cannot have 60 FPS in the HDR mode. Secondly, when you go to the AI mode, it locks you at 720p at 30 FPS. No 60 FPS option here as well. With the basic specs out of the way, let's take the phone outside and take a couple of picture and video samples. And after that, we'll take a look at the results. Okay, now that we're indoors back, and we have a lot of samples to discuss, starting off with the macro camera. This picture, you can see there's a lot of detail in the center of the flower, and the colors are pretty perfect, and the edges are smooth, and there's no artifacting or blurring of any kind. Moving on to the 64 megapixel picture, you can see that it does look a lot clearer than the macro camera, even though it's taken from a lot further, and it has a lot more detail than the one in the macro camera. Moving on, this is the picture from the main camera. You can see it captures a lot of the colors really greatly, and the greens are not unnatural, and the sky is pretty blue as well. Moving on, this is from the 2X. We do not have a separate telephoto lens, so this is just cropped in from the main camera. Moving on to the wide angle, you can see the colors are slightly different, slightly oversaturated, and the saturation does seem to be added in post. Moving on, this is a picture from the main camera with the tilt shift. Moving on, this is the portrait picture. You can see there's a lot of detail, and the edges are captured decently. There's no edge smearing. You can see there's just one spot where the edge is not captured that well, but other than that, the picture is pretty decent. This is with the medium blur, and moving on, this is the most blur, highest setting of the blur, and you can see in this one the edges are crisp and clear. The colors are pretty natural as well, and the detail is nice and sharp. Okay, now let's take a look at the video samples. You can see this one is taken at 4K 30 FPS. And we started off with 2x zoom, and even when zooming all the way in, you can see that there is still a lot of detail. Moving on to the 1080 60 FPS mode, you can see that even when the birds are moving and the camera is panning away, there's no shake or sharp movements. Next, let's take a look at the HDR mode, and it does set us back at 4K 30 FPS. There is no 60 FPS option for the HDR yet, but that could be fixed in a software update. Moving on, let's take a look at the stabilization from the back camera. You can see it's pretty stable, not a lot of sharp movements, and the camera doesn't shake at all. Moving on, this is the time-lapse, and it has the option to capture the time-lapse at 4K at 30 FPS. Now let's take a look at the video samples from the front camera and the back camera in a professional light setting. And this is the type of video you can expect to make Instagram stories and YouTube shorts with, TikToks and everything of the sort. You can also judge the audio quality. This is recorded from the back camera of the POCO X3 GT. Okay, so this is the result from the front camera recording video at 1080p. You can see it's pretty shaky, there's almost no stabilization, and you can judge the audio by yourself. The screen is really dim, so if you're shooting outside you won't be able to see what you're recording, but overall I guess the video would turn out pretty fine. I've taken a look at all of the pictures and videos from the POCO X3 GT, and I have to say I'm pretty surprised by the camera quality of the X3 GT. This camera quality is expected of this price point, but there are better phones that outperform this in terms of camera quality. Other than that, the pictures turned out really crisp, the colors were natural, and very sharp pictures. The video stabilization from the back camera was good, but on the front it was a mess. Other than that, there were a few bugs in the camera app like I showed you while recording video. Well, that's all we have for you today. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more to the point unboxings, reviews, and much more.